I had the invoice in my hand and the pen already out when I noticed it. The woman behind the desk, mid-40s, dark blazer, not a hair out of place, hadn't even looked up from her screen. She signed where I pointed, slid the clipboard back, and went straight back to her call. I was already turning toward the door when something on the far corner of her desk caught the light. Small, pale blue, sitting beside a pot plant like it had always belonged there. A child's gumboot, the left one, tiny, maybe a size 6, and painted on the side, in white correction fluid that had gone slightly yellow with age, was a lopsided daisy with 5 uneven petals. My daughter used to paint daisies on everything. I stopped walking. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the woman to notice and cover the mouthpiece of her phone and say, with the kind of polished irritation that people like her reserve for people like me, "Is there something else?" I said no. I said sorry. I pulled the door behind me and walked to the lift and stood there pressing the button about 4 times more than I needed to. My name is Gerald Tuho. I'm 63 years old. I've been driving a courier van around Wellington for 11 years. Before that, I worked in a freezing works in Masterton. Before that, a shearing gang out of Dannevirke. Before that, a dozen other things that don't amount to much when you write them in a list. I have one son. I had a daughter. Ava went missing 23 years ago. She was 5. We lived out past Greytown then, in a small place on a gravel road with a leaky roof and a letterbox that kept falling off its post. My wife Henrietta and I had been together since we were 19. Ava was born in 2001, 7 years after our son Callum, and she came into the world loud and furious and did not quieten down for approximately the next 5 years. She had opinions about everything, about which sock went on first, about whether the moon was too bright, about the daisy she had painted on the side of her gumboot, the left one only, because she said the right boot already knew how to be happy on its own. She was 5. That is the kind of thing 5-year-olds say, and you smile and file it away somewhere soft and warm inside yourself, and you assume you will have decades more of it. We didn't. It was a Saturday in June 2003. I was out the back, stacking firewood. Henrietta had gone into Greytown to pick up a few things. Callum was 14 and supposed to be watching Ava. He told me later she'd been playing in the front yard, right where he could see her from the window, and then she simply wasn't there anymore. He looked away for a few minutes. "That's all it takes," he kept saying. "That's all it takes." The police searched for 10 days. They found one gumboot in the drain at the end of our road, the right one. The one Ava said already knew how to be happy. No other trace. No witnesses. No answers. The case went cold. I watched it go cold the way you watch a fire go out when you can't find any more wood to put on it. Henrietta got sick 3 years later. Not from grief, the doctors said it had nothing to do with grief, but I have always wondered about that. She passed away in 2009. After that, it was just me and Callum rattling around in a smaller flat in Petone, and then after a while it was just me. Callum moved to Auckland in 2015. We talk on the phone maybe once a month. He's a finance manager for a property company up there. Does well for himself. He always sounds slightly brisk on the phone, like he's giving me a portion of his calendar rather than a conversation. But I tell myself, that's just how he is. He was the one who looked away. Maybe he's never stopped punishing himself. I've never asked. The woman's name was on the invoice. Dr. Renata Fairweather Lodge, Director of Operations, Marlowe Capital Group. I sat in the van for about 20 minutes after I left her building, turning that over. The gumboot. The daisy. Correction fluid. Yellow-white. 5 petals. Slightly uneven. The third one always a bit fatter than the others, because Ava said that petal was the one that got the most sun. I had not seen that boot in 23 years. I had a photograph of it somewhere, in a shoebox under my bed. Henrietta had taken it both boots together on the back step. the afternoon before Ava disappeared. Because Ava had spent all morning decorating the left one and wanted to show it off. I told myself I was being irrational. I told myself correction fluid daisies on small blue gumboots were not unique objects in the world. I told myself I had been alone for a long time, and alone people find patterns in things that aren't there. I drove my afternoon run. I delivered 4 packages to a law firm in Lambton Quay, 2 boxes of branded merchandise to a physiotherapy clinic in Newtown, and a very large cactus to a woman in Island Bay who apologized extensively for the shape of the packaging. I drove it all and I said the right things, and I smiled at the right moments, and the whole time my mind was in that office on the 4th floor of a glass building on Featherston Street, standing in front of a small, pale blue boot with a daisy painted on the side. That night I got the shoebox out from under my bed. The photograph was there. Hinata had printed it. Not just kept it on her phone, she was like that. She believed photos needed to be physical, or they didn't really exist. Both boots on the back step. Left and right. The daisy on the left one. 5 petals, 3rd one wider, painted in white. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time looking at it. Then I got my phone out and searched Dr. Renata Fairweather Lodge. She was 46, according to a profile piece in a Wellington business magazine from 4 years back. Born in Christchurch, educated at Rangi Ruru, then Canterbury, then a postgraduate degree in the UK. Adopted as an infant by Trevor and Maureen Fairweather of Fendleton. No mention of biological parents. No mention of early childhood. Adopted as an infant. I read that 3 times. Ava would be 28 now. I put the phone down. I picked it up again. I did this several times. I am not a man who is easily rattled, you can't be. Not after what I've been through, but my hands weren't entirely steady. Here is what I knew. The woman in that office was 46. Ava would be 28. Those were not the same age. Here is what I also knew. People lie in magazine profiles. Adoption records can contain errors or gaps. A woman who had been taken at 5 years old might not know her real age. And the boot on that desk had a daisy with 5 petals and a wider 3rd one painted in correction fluid. And that was not something you could argue your way around. I called in a favor with a bloke I know who used to work for the ministry. I'm not going to say more than that. He found me a name, not much, but a name. The adoption had been arranged through a private facilitator in Christchurch in 2004. A woman named Gloria Anscombe. She'd been struck off her registry in 2011. Misconduct findings. A year after Ava went missing. I didn't sleep that night. I went back to the building the next morning. Not to deliver anything. I parked down the street and sat there feeling like exactly what I was. A 62-year-old man in a courier van who probably had no idea what he was doing. I'd been there about 40 minutes when she came out. Dr. Fairweather Lodge. Dark blazer again. Different one. She walked quickly. The way people who are important walk in Wellington. Like the wind is a personal inconvenience, aimed specifically at them. She went to a cafe 2 doors down. I waited 5 minutes, then went in. I ordered a flat white I didn't want, and sat 2 tables away, and told myself I was not going to say anything. I was just going to look. She had dark hair. Hinata's family had dark hair. My hair was dark before it went gray. Ava's had been dark too, almost black, with a slight curl to it when it was damp. This woman's hair was straight, but that meant nothing. People's hair changes. She had a small scar on her left forearm, long and thin, faded white, like from a piece of wire or a fence. Ava had a scar on her left arm. She'd caught it on the chicken wire of the rabbit hutch when she was 3. We'd taken her to the Greytown Medical Center, and she'd cried the whole way there and the whole way back, and then informed us once we got home that she was fine, and we had all overreacted. I was staring. She looked up. I looked away. I drank my flat white. I left. In the van, I sat there for a few minutes with my forehead against the steering wheel, which is not something I normally do. Then I called Callum. He answered on the fourth ring, which was better than usual. "Dad, everything all right?" I told him I needed to talk to him about something. I said it was about Ava. There was a silence on the line. That particular kind of silence, not empty, but full. The kind that comes when someone has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and suddenly they can feel the weight of it again. "Dad," he said, "it's been 23 years. I know. We've been through this. The police, I know what the police said. Callum, I need you to listen to me." I told him about the boot, about the daisy, about Dr. Fairweather Lodge, about the adoption, the year, the facilitator who'd been struck off, about the scar. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "That's Dad. That's a lot of coincidences." "Yes," I said. "It is. You can't just walk up to a woman and tell her you think she's your missing daughter. I know that. So what are you going to do?" I told him I didn't know yet. He told me to be careful. He said it in a way that meant more than the words, and I said I would be, and we hung up, and I thought about what his voice had sounded like when I first said the word Ava. Like a door opening in a room he'd kept locked for a very long time. I went to the library that afternoon and used the computer there. I have one at home, but somehow the library felt more serious, more appropriate for what I was doing. I found what I could about Gloria Anscombe. She'd been based in Christchurch. The misconduct findings from 2011 were partly public record. Falsification of documents, improper placement of a child, failure to verify source. There was a name connected to the complaint. A couple who'd attempted to use her services and discovered the child they were being offered had not been surrendered voluntarily. Not surrendered voluntarily. I drove home through the terrace tunnel and sat in my kitchen with a mug of tea going cold in front of me, and thought about a man or a woman who had taken a 5-year-old girl from a front yard in Greytown and handed her to a facilitator in Christchurch, who then arranged for her to become someone else entirely. I thought about what that chain of people would have needed. Money, desperation, a willingness to look at a small person and see a transaction. Then I thought about the boot on the desk, the daisy with 5 petals, the third one wider because it got the most sun. I made another call. An old friend from the freezing works days, whose nephew is a private investigator based in Lower Hutt. I left a message. He rang me back within the hour. His name was Dion Prasad, and he was matter-of-fact in the way competent people often are. I told him everything. He asked good questions and didn't ask unnecessary ones. He said he'd need 2 weeks and a retainer fee. I said yes to both without hesitating, which was not something my bank balance would entirely forgive me for. But some things are not about bank balances. Dion came back in 11 days. He sat across from me at my kitchen table with a manila folder and went through it the way a doctor presents. Results methodical, without drama. But watching my face, the private adoption had been arranged in April 2004. The child in question had been listed as approximately 3 to 4 years of age in the initial documentation, a discrepancy Dion found notable, since official documents recorded Renata Fairweather as having been placed at age approximately 1. The source of the child was listed as a South Island Regional Welfare referral. The facilitator, Anscombe, had died in 2019, but before her practice was shut down, one of her former office staff, a woman now living in Nelson, had spoken to investigators about a specific case. A little girl brought in by a man she'd never seen before. Dark hair. Distressed. A gumboot on one foot, nothing on the other. A daisy painted on the boot. I had to ask Dion to stop there for a moment. He waited. He was good at waiting. When I told him to go on, he said the office worker had reported it because the child had a scar on her left forearm, and the man who brought her had claimed she'd had it her whole life. But the worker had noticed the wound still looked relatively recent, and the child had kept saying a word. The worker couldn't make out something that might have been a name, or might have been a place. Dion also had something else. He had done a familial DNA profile comparison, working from a source I will not identify because it would embarrass someone who was trying to help me. The comparison was not a court-admissible test, but the probability of a first-degree biological relationship between myself and Renata Fairweather Lodge was, according to the geneticist Dion used, above 94%. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after he left. Then I rang Callum. He flew down from Auckland that weekend. I hadn't expected that he'd been talking about coming for months without it happening, the way busy people do. But he was at my door on Saturday morning with a bag over his shoulder and a look on his face I hadn't seen since he was 14 years old, standing in our front yard in Greytown while a policeman took notes. We sat at the kitchen table. I showed him the folder. He read it slowly and carefully, and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, I have to tell you something." I waited. He put the folder down and looked at his hands. He has Hiniata's hands, broader than mine, capable looking. They weren't very still right then. "The day Ava went missing," he said. "I told you I looked away for a few minutes." "Yes, that wasn't it, wasn't just looking away." He stopped, started again. There was a car, parked down by the fence. I didn't think anything of it at the time. There was a man. He spoke to Ava through the gate. I was watching from the window, and I saw her talking to him, and I thought she knows him. She wasn't scared. She went to the gate. And I thought she knows him. So I went back to what I was doing. The kitchen was very quiet. "I was 14, he said. "I thought I recognized the car. I was almost sure of it. It was the same make as Uncle Derek's. That's why I thought she knew him. After she was gone, I told the police I hadn't seen anything because I was scared. I was so scared that what I'd done, not going outside, not checking, I was scared that would make it my fault." Uncle Derek was Hiniata's brother. He had moved to Australia in 2005. He and Hiniata had not been close, and after she passed, I had no reason to stay in touch with him. I had not thought about Derek Parada in years. I said his name. Callum nodded. "I never knew for certain," he said. "I was a kid. The car was similar. I couldn't see the plates. I've spent 23 years not knowing whether I was right or whether I was wrong, and I was too ashamed to say anything either way." We sat there together, father and son, in a small kitchen in Pitone, with the morning light coming through the window and the weight of 23 years sitting on the table between us. I put my hand over his. He didn't move it away. I forwarded everything to Dion. He tracked Derek Parada to Brisbane, where he had died in 2017 liver failure. But before he died, he had sold a property he owned in Ashburton, and the sale records showed that property had been purchased in mid-2003, approximately 8 months before Ava went missing. He had paid cash. Dion found something else. Derek Parada had gambling debts, significant ones, spread across several years. In 2003, those debts had been settled, all of them, within a matter of months. I don't have proof of everything. I want to say that clearly. What I have is a chain of things that connect in only one direction, and a DNA result that sits at 94%, and a small blue boot with a daisy on the side that has been sitting on a desk in Wellington for reasons I do not yet know but intend to find out. I wrote a letter to Dr. Renata Fairweather Lodge, not to her work address. To a residential address. Dion had located a house in Courier. I wrote it by hand, which I think matters. I wrote it over 4 drafts, and the thing that made it hardest was not knowing how much she knew about herself or whether any of this was going to come as a complete shock, or whether part of her had been carrying something unresolved for a long time and simply not had the words for it. I did not tell her what I suspected. I told her who I was. I told her I had lost a daughter in 2003. I told her there was an object on her desk that had belonged to my daughter, and I would like very much to understand how it came to be there. I said I did not mean to distress her. I said I would not contact her again if she didn't want me to. I put my phone number at the bottom and posted it. That was 3 weeks ago. She rang on a Tuesday evening, late enough that I was already in bed. I answered on the second ring. She was quiet for a moment before she spoke. When she did, her voice was careful, not cold, but careful, measured. The voice of a person who had learned, somewhere along the way, to think before they gave anything away. She asked me to describe the boot. I described it. Every detail. The color, the size, the daisy, the correction fluid, the third petal wider than the others. Another silence. Then she said, "I was told it was mine. From before." She paused. "I was told I was 4 when I was adopted. I always thought that was a bit old for an infant placement. But my parents, my adoptive parents, they were very kind. I didn't want to make them uncomfortable by asking too much. I asked her what she remembered from before the adoption. She said she remembered almost nothing. Fragments, she said. A room that smelled like firewood. A voice she couldn't put a face to. Singing something. She said she used to dream about a rabbit. And she'd never understood why, and she'd stopped thinking about it years ago. We had a rabbit hutch. I didn't say that. Not yet. I just listened. She said, I had the boot DNA tested 8 months ago, against a sample from a public genealogy database. I waited. It matched a male contributor, she said. Partially. Enough to indicate a probable biological relative. I couldn't identify who. I hired someone to investigate, but they couldn't get further than a surname cluster. Tuho. It's not a common name. The kitchen was very quiet. I found the boot in a box of things from my childhood, she said. I never knew where it came from. My mother, my adoptive mother, she thought maybe it had been included with some other items from the placement. She didn't know it was significant. I said, the daisy on the left boot. My daughter painted it herself. She said the right boot already knew how to be happy on its own. The silence that followed was the longest one. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Not the careful, measured voice. Something under that. I need some time, she said. I need to sit with this. I told her I understood. I told her I had waited 23 years, and I could wait as long as she needed. I meant it. I meant it completely. She said, I'll call you again. She did. She called 4 days later. We have now spoken 6 times. We met in person last Thursday, a cafe in Te Aro. Neutral ground, both of us arriving separately and a bit early, and pretending we hadn't. She is composed and intelligent and slightly guarded in a way that makes complete sense given what she has learned about her early life. She has Hinata's hands. I hadn't expected that. We have agreed to do a formal DNA test. Results in 3 weeks. I don't need the result to know, but she does, and she deserves it. And so we will wait for it together. Callum came back down last weekend. He and Renata have not met yet. She wants to take things in stages, which is entirely reasonable. But he and I walked along the waterfront on Saturday morning, all the way to Freiburg Pool and back, and he told me more about that day in Greytown than he'd ever said before. He talked for almost the whole walk. I mostly listened. At the end, near the car park, he stopped and said, I've thought about telling you every year since Mum died. I kept thinking, she's not here to be hurt by it anymore, but I kept not saying it. I said, you were 14. You made a mistake. You've been paying for it for 23 years. He said, "So have you." I said, "Yes." We stood there a moment. The harbor was very flat and gray, the kind of gray that isn't bleak, just calm. "I think she's real, Dad," he said. "I think it's her." "I think so too." He nodded. He looked out at the water. He said, "I'm glad you saw the boot. I still drive the van. I'm out on the road every day, same streets, same buildings, same courier dock at the back of that glass tower on Featherston Street. Last week I made a delivery to the third floor different company. Nothing to do with Marlowe Capital, and on the way out I pressed the wrong button in the lift and went up to 4 instead of down. The doors opened. The corridor. The frosted glass. I stood there for a second, then pressed the right button. I don't need to go back in. The boot isn't there anymore. Renata told me she moved it when she started making enquiries. She put it in the same box it had come from, in her spare room. She said when the results come back, whatever they show, she would like me to have it. I said, I'd like that too. What I want to say, more than anything else, more than the facts of what happened or who did what or how, a small girl became a different person in a different city is this. Pay attention to the small things, the things that seem too minor to mention, too uncertain to act on, too long ago to be worth revisiting. I am 63 years old, and I have been driving vans and stacking wood and keeping quiet about the parts of life that hurt too much to examine. And in all that time, the thing that moved everything forward was not a court case, or a breakthrough, or someone finally coming forward. It was a small blue boot on the corner of a desk. It was paying attention. Tell the people beside you what you know, even when it costs you something. Callum carried that secret for 23 years, and it hollowed out a part of him that should have been whole. The truth is heavy, but secrets are heavier. They don't stay where you put them. They spread into everything. And this, it is not too late. I do not know what Renata and I will be to each other, whether we will find our way to something that resembles a family, or whether the years between us are simply too many and too strange to cross. But we are trying. We are sitting in cafes and talking carefully and learning who the other person is. That is not nothing. After 23 years, that is a very great deal. The right boot is still out there somewhere. I used to think about that all the time, where it had ended up, whether it had gone into a drain or a skip bin or just dissolved into the world the way things do. I've stopped trying to answer that. Some things you have to let go of. Not because they don't matter, but because holding them is taking up space that something else needs now. There is a result coming in 3 weeks. I am 63 years old, and I am not a patient man by nature, but I have had a great deal of practice. I can wait.